Well, my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said about the series premiere for Star Trek Picard? Stick around and find out. Hey, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. This is my uncut review of the series premiere for Star Trek Picard. The synopsis on IMDb reads, plot kept under wraps, described as a follow-up series to Star Trek The Next Generation 1987, and centers on Jean-Luc Picard, Sir Patrick Stewart, in the next chapter of his life. Now, my slightly more detailed description of this would be that Jean-Luc Picard is still haunted by the loss of Data from the movie Star Trek Nemesis. That was the last Next Generation movie that was released, and the last time we saw these characters, as far as I'm aware. But a legacy possibly left behind by Data sends Picard on an investigation to get to the bottom of it, despite the fact that he is no longer on good terms with Starfleet. I think they could have totally given you that much to give you just a little bit of flavor of what the series is. But chances are, if you're a Star Trek fan, you already knew that about the series and more before going into it. I was a Star Trek fan of the Next Generation and the series that followed it, except for whatever the Scott Bakula one was. I watched a few episodes, I'm like, I'm out. And so I definitely have a fondness for the Next Generation cast and fond memories of watching that show. I watched all of the movies, so I have a nostalgia and a fondness for the characters, but ever since like Farscape came out, and then after that Battlestar Galactica, I was like, oh, I can get science fiction and really interesting character-driven stories, which Star Trek never was, in my experience. It was very concept-oriented, story-driven, plot-driven, idea-driven, as opposed to being about the characters, what they're feeling, and getting us to identify with what the characters are feeling. It was very straight-laced and tightened up. Everybody's performances and stuff were, much more stale compared to what television has become in recent years, especially since it has become serialized. And so I was interested in seeing, in this world now where it's cool to make serialized stuff, and now audiences can binge watch shows much more easily and keep track of stories and character arcs and stuff. Could they bring that to the Next Generation universe of Star Trek? And I'm happy to report that I do feel that was the case. I should mention going in that I watched over the Christmas break some key episodes of the Next Generation series, which reminded me of why I will never be able to go back to it, but on the other hand also revived in me some of my affection for characters like Picard and Data. And I watched movies, the Next Generation movies and stuff to get ready for this. And so my nostalgia was a little bit kind of charged up and ready and refreshed, to help me get into this series. And I do think that played a role, especially with some of the plot elements that are key to this premiere and to what looks like is going to be the story of the first season. So I would recommend watching Star Trek Nemesis to refresh your memory on the last time we saw Data and what was going on, and the character B4. If you don't know who that is, then that's a red flag. Say to yourself, I should watch Star Trek Nemesis if I don't know who B4 is. I should watch Nemesis so that I'll be ready for this show. Anyway, let's talk about the story, the script, the pacing, the tone. What is the basic vibe of this animal, the basic construction of it? This is the stylized, dramatic take on Star Trek that I wanted for this series. Not over-stylized, it's not Zack Snyder-ish, but like different fading techniques that we take for granted, different like camera changes so that we're seeing, lots of close-ups that are snapping back and forth between two different people in a conversation, or like having the camera show us an object that someone is holding while they continue talking. Classic Star Trek didn't do these kinds of things. They kept largely wide shots, or when they went for close-ups, it wasn't near as often, and even those close-ups would contain maybe one other person in the so-called close-up or whatever, so the acting style just had to be a lot different. And this story and this production really brings modern premium television quality filmmaking to bear, and in ways that really helped me to invest in the character and in the subtext going on, as opposed to just the dialogue written on the page of the script. So it's not just about ideas. In fact, it's not primarily about ideas, this show, based on the premiere. It's about character. It's about a very driven Picard who regrets some of the choices that he's made in life. It features other characters with very emotional investment in their actions that they take in this show or that they plan to take in the future. It does still play with ideas, and I'm going to get to that, but they are the backdrop more than kind of like the central focus of the story. This is not about the anomaly of the week like classic Star Trek so often was. It's not action-packed, but it's shot stylistically and presented in an interesting way much of the time, you know. And also there's tension between characters that is much more felt than it ever was to me watching the TV series and even most of the Next Generation movies. And so it was keeping me interested and engaged on those levels of you know, modern stylistic filming technique and editing technique and stuff like that, and then also the character-driven performances and what the cameras did to help us see those performances better. It does have action. I don't want to neglect saying that, including like some cool hand-to-hand combat, blasters, and other explosive events taking place. It feels much to me like, in those moments, like the premium TV version of the action that we see in the Abrams Star Trek movies. So they're bringing some of that sensibility of action into the classic Trek continuity. Much appreciated by me. Let's talk about the cast a little bit. I'm just going to mention really Patrick Stewart. I'll not name anybody else, I don't think. I mean, Brent Spiner does great as Data, and in the premieres, I'm not going to talk about the nature of Data's appearances, because in the commercials they don't really identify what's going on and what the nature of his that character's involvement in the series is. But we do see Brent Spiner playing that role, and he does a really fine job as always. And I think they do some nice things with visual effects to kind of hide the aging a little bit there. Patrick Stewart, though, is obviously the standout for me, even more so than in the last Trek movies he was in, which did allow his performing ability to come to the forefront more than the typical episode of Star Trek. But in here, he's given even more close-ups to serve the subtlety of the performance choices that he brings in. It's a very different Picard than I'm used to, because we've had 20 years between the events of Nemesis and this premiere of this series, and so he's in a very different stage of life, a very different situation in life, and we hear about what's been going on with him in the last 20 years, and so he is an older, slightly more bitter and certainly jaded Picard, and so it's interesting. It's a different character in that regard. It's not the same buttoned up Picard from the series, you know, and so I like that. I like that a lot. But even saying that, it still reads to me as Picard, you know, and maybe that's just because it's Patrick Stewart, so of course it's going to read like Picard, but. No, I feel like it's still very consistent with where we've seen Picard, and I believe that Picard could have gone through the things that he went through in the last 20 years and arrive at this point, you know. The other performers in the premiere felt fine to me, but now and then there was a kind of like a scientist that Picard talks to, a blonde-haired scientist, that near the end they were going for some quiet drama, and I just kind of wasn't buying it. It wasn't that she was like glaringly bad to me or whatever. It just felt like actor choices, as opposed to me really feeling like this is a real character a person that I've met before, a type of personality I've met before. There was just something slightly what felt like put on to me, and the camera angles help. They'll have just a little bit of shaky cam. It's not these static shots of the original series, and so there are elements in the way things are shot that can ground it and make me believe a little bit more easily in kind of like the reality of the scene and how characters are behaving. But the acting choices or the style, something just wasn't quite connecting with me there, and that was true not just of her, but of at least one or two other performers in the show that it looks like are going to be, all of them, continuing members of the cast going forward. So that wasn't like a big note of encouragement for me as I think about the series. And there were like some clips that they showed, like coming soon on Picard. That's not what they said, but they showed clips of upcoming episodes and stuff. And there was an instance there where like somebody was shouting something fanatical, blah, 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 And I was like, oh, dude, that is some classic style Star Trek acting right there, you know? So even though it's definitely taken some major steps forward in terms of, you know, not being as static and stale in the acting style as it was in the TV show, there are still what feel like vestiges of that, oddly enough. I don't know why there would be, but maybe I'm making a connection that doesn't exist. But the fact is, there were a few performance moments that just felt a little bit not real to me, a little bit like actor choices. Better than the CW for my experience, but not the best that premium TV acting can give us, I think. As far as stunts and visuals, you know, this is premium TV quality, and that's great to, you know, be in this time now where, you know, premium TV shows can give us this kind of visual effects, and you really see the difference between this and, like, you know, a really popular show like the Flash and the other CW shows. I tried watching, you know, a little bit of the Crisis on Infinite Earths thing, and I was like, the effects, I was like, oh my gosh, this is a network television show. And so really network television that just cemented in my mind as like, no, premium television, you know, can really, if it's worth paying for, then you'll get what you pay for, you know, if it's your kind of show, because they really give the budget to the visual effects, to the set design, to the costume design, to just all the production overall. And so it looks actually better than Star Trek Nemesis and the other, you know, movies that were made with the Next Generation cast, and has some nice stylization to it that I really appreciate. This is what I want. This is what I wanted, you know. And of course, you know, I would like things to be a little bit better in the acting department, but man, I feel like I definitely got more than I probably, you know, had a right to expect, you know, with a show that's returning, going back to classic Trek in so many ways. So what about themes? Are there any moral, philosophical, or spiritual themes going on in the meta or the embedded in the story that might bring about some worthwhile thought or conversation? Well, synthetic life is at the center of the plot. And I'm going to try to be vague, but some people might still consider what I'm about to share a spoiler, so, you know, you can tune out right now if you want. But I'm going to be vague. I don't think it's a spoiler. Synthetic life is at the center of the plot. We're clearly meant to value synthetic life, to sympathize with synthetic life characters equally as though they are just as much persons as humans are, and that's nothing new for the atheism of Star Trek, which typically denies that humans are anything more than wet machines. Of course, we can, you know, recreate human life, and it could be just as worthy of being called life as ours, because there's no non-physical component that we have to account for when we create said synthetic life. You know, so that's not surprising to me, but what was surprising to me was an exchange that Picard had with another character. And Picard tells a character that's struggling with the idea that they might be a synthetic human. He, you know, calms them, tries to give them these reassuring words, and says to them, have you ever considered the possibility that you are something lovingly and deliberately created? That really surprised me, because what's the metaphor here representing? I don't think you put a line of dialogue in there without trying to tug at the heartstrings of your audience and based on some experience they might have had or some thoughts they might have wondered or pondered or whatever, you know. So what could the metaphor represent? Well, on an atheistic level, your choices are limited. I think that it could refer to parents who lovingly choose to have children, but in this day and age, there are many people born that are not born without the loving intention of the parents involved. It could be a mistake, it could be rape, it could be all kinds of other complicated things, just, you know. So it kind of leaves the people that were not very intentionally and lovingly brought about through the union of their parents, kind of leaves them high and dry with this great dramatic moment that Picard is meant to be having and expressing, and that we're meant to feel something about, you know. And so the only other option I see is a metaphor for God's creation of humanity, which would be very uncharacteristic for the typically atheistic leanings of Star Trek. But it's a beautiful moment in the premiere when seen as a parallel of God's loving, intentional creation of us. So I'm going to be keeping a close eye on the themes of Star Trek Picard. I would love for Star Trek to break from its very narrow atheistic philosophy and, like, say, Battlestar Galactica, allow, at least, for other philosophical possibilities that the audience can have as options in their mind as they're interpreting and figuring out what their takeaways are for the episodes presented to them. All right, well, I have no idea what your tastes are in TV, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Peter, wait, don't watch the premiere yet. Wait for the whole season to play out and then use like a free trial, or if you don't have one yet for CBS All Access, then just go ahead and pay the cheapy, commercials included version to binge the whole season once it's fully released. Your recent viewing of the Essential Picard EPs that were suggested actually by IGN, if you're looking for a recommendation, and your viewing of the Next Generation movies is definitely rewarded, and nostalgia is going to help you as you head into this, but this show also has the drama and production style that you want in all of your fiction these days. This is not essential viewing for you, but it's interesting enough that you'll definitely want to give the first season a try on the cheap. All right, you can get my spoiler-filled reactions to the premiere of Star Trek Picard today in my Spoiler Car video series, just one of many perks available depending on your level of support at patreon.com/SpiritBlade Productions. This one has no MPAA rating. I would describe it as probably light PG-13 or maybe a PG type rating for sci-fi action and violence. All right, those are my thoughts. I'd love to get yours in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, click that bell to stay connected to this channel and what we're doing here. I want to thank the SpiritBlade insiders for helping to make reviews like this possible. Again, info at patreon.com/SpiritBlade Productions. Then I hope you'll join us soon over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. We've got a ton going on here at SpiritBlade Productions and Christian Geek Central, including our in-depth Bible study for geeks, movie, game, and other entertainment reviews or commentary, live streams, Christian geek news, original audio dramas, and tons more. And on top of all that, you can become a SpiritBlade insider with an influential voice and get access to exclusive content and rewards. It's your involvement as a patron that will keep all of this going and growing, so I want to thank you for your consideration in that. For more information, please check out our Patreon page through the link below at patreon.com/SpiritBlade Productions. Thanks for listening.